Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. As I've detailed before, my husband, still in his early 50s, is on home hospice, dying of brain cancer. I often read aloud to David, and it always feels like such a perfect and gentle way to connect. The book I've most recently finished is the really beautiful collection of essays, Late Migrations, A Natural History of Love and Loss by Margaret Renkl. I thought I would share a bit with you. All of the essays are very short pieces, almost prose poems sometimes, that blend the author's personal history of growing up in the rural South in the late 1960s and 1970s, including a discussion of the racism that white children didn't always see or understand, with her observation of the natural world, both then and now. In some ways, Renkl's writing sometimes reminds me of one of my old favorite Southern writers, Eudora Welty. There's pretty much no greater compliment than that in my book. At some point in the future, I really do want to talk more about this book in a more comprehensive way, but today I just want to read out a couple of her short pieces, all about stories and reading. First, Barney Beagle Plays Baseball, Birmingham, 1968. It was already dark outside, but not quite supper time. Late in the year, we moved to Birmingham, and I don't know why I was alone with my mother in the grocery store. If my brother and sister weren't tagging along too, then my father must have been home with them. But if Daddy was home, why did I come with Mama to the Piggly Wiggly at the very worst time of day, when the store was swamped with husbands stopping on their way home from work to pick up the one missing item their wives needed for supper? I might never have been in the Piggly Wiggly at night before, but I knew that men did not understand the rules of the grocery store, did not understand which direction to push the cart to stay in the flow of traffic, did not recognize that standing perplexed in the middle of the aisle is bad grocery store citizenship, especially right at supper time. My mother was surely in a hurry. Maybe I was slowing her down. She tried to zip around the bewildered men standing despondent among the canned goods. And maybe she sent me off to pass the time in the corner of the store where books and toys were displayed. Or maybe I wandered off on my own, in those days of retail on a human scale and no thought at all that kidnappers could be lurking in the Piggly Wiggly. The toys were familiar, paltry offerings, dusty cellophane packages of jacks and silly putty eggs and paddle balls and green army men, but the books were mostly new to me. The few children's books at our house belonged to an old-fashioned era of read-aloud classics, fairy tales and nursery rhymes and Bible stories, and my own favorite, poems of childhood. The Piggly Wiggly display featured what seemed to be a vast array of little golden books and early readers. I reached for a green book with a picture in the foreground of a dog wearing a cap turned sideways between his floppy ears. We didn't have a dog ourselves. I had not yet made friends in our new city, and I wanted a dog more than I wanted anything. I scanned the rest of the book jacket, pausing at the picture of boys in baseball uniforms. I had heard of baseball, but I'd never seen a game, in person or on TV, and did not recognize the outfits the boys were wearing. Why were these boys wearing pajamas outside on the grass? I only glanced at the words at the top of the book jacket. I was learning in first grade the sounds that letters make, but I could not yet read, and words in a book meant nothing to me. But then, as I stood in the bright light of the grocery store with darkness pooling outside, unable to reach me, the letters on the cover of that book suddenly untangled themselves into words. Barney Beagle Plays Baseball. Barney Beagle Plays Baseball. Oh, I remember thinking, it's about a dog who plays baseball, and opening the book to see what happened. And only then did I realize I was actually reading the words. I was reading I went racing to find Mama, dodging despairing fathers, peering at can labels, to show her how I could sound out all the words on every page and understand each one. And she was so happy about my happiness that she told me we could bring the book home, even though we had no money at all, and it had not even crossed my mind that she might buy it for me. Okay, another one. Tell Me a Story of Deep Delight, Birmingham, 1970. We're in the double bed. I'm asleep, and my sister is scooched over next to me, awake. Tell me a story, she says loudly. She is old enough to climb out of the crib, but too young to know how to whisper. Tell me a story. I'll tell you a story in the morning, I mumble. Tell me one story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who wanted a story, but her sister was so tired, and the little girl said, okay, and fell asleep. I was born for sleep. My baby sister was born for waking. Tell me a long story. It takes a while to think of a long story, I say. You be real quiet and let me think. Sometime later, our mother stops to check in on us. The room is dark and silent, but a wedge of light from the hall falls upon her toddler's open eyes. Mama tiptoes to the edge of the bed and squats to whisper in her baby's ear. Lori, it's late, she says. It's so late even big girls like Margaret are sound asleep. Her not asleep, Mama. Her just thinking of a story. As a matter of unreliable narration, the story is hard to parse. I am quoting from memory a story my mother often told, a story that came from her own memory of a time long since past. Though I have no way of knowing how accurate my mother's memory was, I'm confident that I am quoting her word for word. Her just thinking of a story. I know these words by heart because my mother told this story many times. I'm less confident of my own lines, but I remember well the miniature drama that played out night after night in the old double bed that had come to us from my grandparents. And my sister remembers it too. I would pretend to be thinking of a story, or in a version my sister swears is true, though I have no recollection of it, I would tell her I had to say my prayers and promptly get back to sleep. She would wait in the darkness, restless, impatient, until she finally fell asleep as well. I don't know why our mother loved this story so, but my husband and I used to spy on our own young sons at night, listening to them giggling through the baby monitor, listening to them keep each other awake in the dark. I was amazed at the way their minds worked when they had no sense of being observed, amazed at the way their lives were already unfolding without me. Perhaps my mother, too, loved that peek into the perfect innocence of my sister's trust. And because it was a story she told with such love and absolute delight, I think I can see it myself. My sister, flipping from one side to the other, me, asleep, but riding waves of consciousness with each rustle, each exasperated sigh. Our mother, whispering to her little girl, a child full of faith, poised for a magical tale, a story made of just the right words, waiting for them to drift over her in the darkness and lull her into dreaming. I'll read one more. This one is called Once Again, the Brandenburgs, Birmingham, 1980. By the spring of our senior year, we knew our teacher was dying. In truth, she'd been dying for some time, since the winter we were juniors, but our faith was unshakable, and she had young children at home. And so she believed this cancer, like the one that had claimed her breasts when she was only a teenager, was just a blackberry winter, an out-of-season cold snap that will not last or cause permanent damage. We believed, too, because how could we not? We were children. Death had no hold on us. Spring came to Alabama, but it did not come to our teacher, whose hair was gone by then. her voice barely more than a whisper. She had long since ceased to lead the class in any conventional way. On good days, a family member would drive her to school and help her to her classroom, but most days were not good by then, and she would send someone from home to collect our work or give us another task. Assignments came through her wavering voice, played back on cassette tape. Notes on what to look for in our reading. Assignments for our presentations on Shakespearean tragedy, or the Romantic poets, or the novels of Thomas Hardy. I remember so much about those books and plays and poems, the kinds of details I remember from no other high school class. I still know great chunks of King Lear by heart. Of all the memorable moments of that memorable year, the one that has held me through my own calamities is a story we read in the spring we realized our teacher was dying. She came into class carrying a thin box of records and a sheaf of photocopied papers, and behind her came her stepfather, pushing a cart from the library that held a record player. But here the recollection comes undone. Picturing that day now, I'm suddenly not sure about those papers. I think I see stacked on top of the box of records in her arms. Maybe she didn't hand out the story as copies. Maybe it was bound instead in a textbook we had hardly opened all year. All these images are absolutely clear, but I know better than to trust them. I have turned them over so often, the edges have become soft and worn, their contours wholly unreliable. I know it was the story of a man during wartime who sat in the back of a boxcar and closed his eyes and removed himself from the massacre by playing Bach's Brandenburg concertos in his mind. And after we read it, our teacher opened the top of the record player, carefully removed an LP from its sleeve, and placed it on the turntable. When she set the needle down, the sound of Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 filled that windowless cinder block room. I could not believe that something so beautiful, so otherworldly, had been conceived by a human mind and brought to my life by human hands. So many of the other details of that day have fallen away. Surely there was a class discussion, though I don't recall it. But that high, haunting violin in the second movement of Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 in F major is something I will remember till I die. It has been decades since that English class that burned itself into me and the death of the teacher whom I will always love. As grief has piled on grief in that way of time, I think I've come to understand why a soldier would find solace in such timeless music, which I have heard since then in recordings and on the radio more times than I can count. But when I heard it live for the first time, when I sat and listened to an orchestra play all 6 Brandenburg concertos, all I could think of, in the midst of that unfathomable beauty, was a line from Lear. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thanks for humoring me here today. I hope to see you sometime soon here on Hannah's Books.